Welcome back. My guest tonight is Zolani Mkiva, the Secretary General of Contralesa. We're discussing the land expropriation debate. Now, Mr. Mkiva, a lot was said today at that briefing which you held together with EFF leaders. But what was the nub of Contralesa's message? The one thing you went there to say?
The one thing that we went there to say is that we support expropriation of land without compensation, one. Two, we support the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution to ensure that that which we need happen does actually happen, and there's an instrument of law that actually empowers it for it to occur. Number two, we went there to say to the EFF that the land already in the hands of Africans. So when we talk expropriation without compensation, we refer to the 87% of land, which is land that was taken brutally against the African majority. So we are saying that that's the land that must be restored and be given back to its rightful owners. We support that part. So that's the key message. And the EFF is in agreement with us that the role of traditional leaders is that of custodians of particularly the ancestral land. Not that the rest of the 87th land is not ancestral land in Africa, but we understand that with time, history, and experience, things have happened. So we agree that the overarching custodian of the whole landscape of South Africa should be the state. So we're saying land must be transferred to the state, and the state must have the overarching ownership.
Okay. Now, from where Contralesa sits, is how the Ingonyama Trust managing the land it has, on behalf, of the people of that part of the country, in line with your ideals, with how you see the land issue being addressed, and how you see the land that is currently in its custodianship should be ideally managed?
Well, Ingonyama Trust is an instrument of administration established in 1994 and amended halfway through the new dispensation. And we're saying the land under that administration is part of the 13%. It is land
that you've made very clear.
Yes.
That's the land that shouldn't be touched.
Yes.
But now, and I don't...
Where there are issues and complaints about certain things that are being done which are not in line with custom or with law, we are saying that as Africans, let's close the door. Let's deal with those issues amongst ourselves and correct them. That's what we're saying.
But why should that happen behind closed doors?
It's a very topical issue and a very sensitive issue. We don't believe that this debate must happen in the media. We believe that as Africans, we ought to sit and have a sense of having our own sophistication as a people, to say that when we deal with a matter that relates to our ancestral land, we have a right to close the door and talk about it and handle it.
But you accept also that you live in a democracy, number one. Number two, your own institution has been called to question many a times. In fact, at that briefing, Floyd Shibambu specifically highlighted some of the concerns raised by Kgalema Motlante's high-level panel around nepotism, around the discrimination of women when it comes to allocating land.
We live in a democracy that must take into cognizance that we are an African country and we have got an African approach to African issues. And therefore, we believe that where we have an African problem, we need to employ an African solution. So we can't
but I'm sure that doesn't translate to misogyny, that doesn't translate to you running roughshod over the interests of women, children, and other vulnerable sections of our population.
No, you see, you see, where there is a problem where women and young people and aged or vulnerable groupings do not have access to land, and you accuse traditional leadership of purporting that. We are totally against that. We want women to have tenure security in this country. We want the vulnerable to have tenure security in this country. And the institution of traditional leadership wants to ensure that. Look, Vuyo, if you go to the communities under the jurisdiction of traditional leadership, you will never see a street kid. You see street kids in the cities. Go to any communal land. You won't see what you see in the cities, because we provide a roof for all the people. We ensure that people have tenure security. Where people are doing things that are unlawful and prejudicing women, that is un-African and anti-African, and it must be condemned with the scorn that it deserves.
But would you deny or dismiss the fact that there are traditional leaders who don't behave the way we expect people to do? Yes. So why then, and I'm glad you do, because why then would all traditional leaders be offended when, for example, Kgalema Motlanthe stands up and say some traditional leaders behave like tin pot dictators?
He did not say some, he said most of them. That's a huge difference. You can't use an isolated case and paint the entire landscape with the same paintbrush. That's wrong. The majority of traditional leaders in this country are very responsible. Hence, they have credibility and legitimacy in the eyes of the people.
Do you dismiss also some of the issues that he has raised? And for a second, let's forget that it's the Ingonyama Trust, right? Mm-hmm. That where it is found, or there is evidence, or there are at least allegations or complaints, right, that the money accruing from the performance of these assets doesn't go where it is supposed to go. That those
if
issues
it does not
should
go
be raised.
where it's supposed to go, it needs to be raised and it needs to be corrected. Corrective measures must kick in, and we must not beat about the bush that where wrong things are happening, we ought to correct them.
Now, do you accept also that what Kgalema Motlanthe said, together with the rest of the panel, is not what should happen? They were asked to determine some facts, to collate some information, and with what they have, or they would have been exposed to, make a recommendation to Parliament. And that right now it is actually up to Parliament to make a decision on what then should happen next, including disputing both their facts as well as their recommendations.
We think Parliament jumped the gun to constitute the panel that is headed by former President Kgalema Motlanthe. That should not have happened. We believe that they have put the cart before the horse. What ought to happen is what is actually happening now, where there are consultations that are happening across the length and the breadth of the country, where communities and the people themselves are voicing out as to what they want to see happening about the land question in South Africa. We don't need selected people.
But then
we don't need selected people by just the Parliament, by the Speaker. The Speaker can't just appoint people to say they must go and make a research. What we find so bizarre as well is that the experts that are forming part of that high-level panel are people that we know that they hate the institution of traditional leadership with passion. And therefore, we are not surprised with those recommendations. We believe that former President Kgalema Motlanthe was badly advised by those experts. These are the people who want to confuse the land question so that it remains in this state of confusion without any movement forward, and they want the status quo, and that is why we think that the best option, amend Section 25 of the Constitution, and then expropriation of land without compensation is implemented with immediate effect, with the entire landscape of the land of South Africa being transferred. That will sort out, because this issue of land here has been complicated too much.
But the ANC sold, right, on that. But why aren't you regarding Kgalema Motlanthe's process as a contribution to this big issue and debate going on, in the same way that Julius Malema told us today that we should treat King Goodwill Zwelithini's pronouncements yesterday? Now, in other words, irrespective of what came before what?
The land question in South Africa does not need a high-level panel. It doesn't need that. We've got institutions of state here. We must not create institutions and instruments of state and then undermine them by appointing certain individuals to do what is supposed to be done by the establishment of state institutions.
Which particular
Parliament
instrument?
itself has a way of interfacing with communities without
which is what it's doing now.
No, but which is what it's doing now. But I'm saying that for installing a high-level team, it was not right for them to have done that. And the worst thing is
but what is inherently wrong with a high-level panel?
It's the approach, it's the approach to issues. We need to have an acceptable approach, an approach that is embraced by everybody else. So the structures that we have are democratic structures of the country, which are acceptable, which are constitutional, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we should follow the acceptable norms and standards. That high-level panel went to consult only in urban and peri-urban areas. They did not go to the grassroots. They did not go to the communal areas. They did not even meet with traditional leaders. We never even met them as Contralesa. We are such a big organization that is across the land, in all provinces, in all districts, and in all local municipalities we are there, but we're never consulted. What kind of a structure is that works in that fashion?
Now, the King Zwelithini said yesterday that he will be having at least 2 other engagements, one in Durban and another one here in Gauteng. What will the rest of you, Contralesa, as members of Contralesa, be doing over the next few weeks and months to actually try and get this process to where you ideally want it to get to?
Well, we are very active in the communities out there. Even at Ulundi yesterday, we sent a very strong delegation led by Inkosi Pathisizwe Chiliza, who is our NEC member and our chairperson in that province. So as all these imbizos are happening, we are going to be involved. And we are actually encouraging and talking to all other kings of the country to do the same, to convene their communities, to ensure that they are given an opportunity to say what they wish to see happening about the land question in South Africa. And we know the outcome because it's predetermined. We went into our struggle to ensure that we fight for the retention, for our land to be restored to ourselves. So we are clear, but we have to conform to the standards of consultation and so on and so forth, so that we go through a formal process of doing what is expected for us to do. So Contralesa is going to be all over the show. We are deploying our forces to the grassroots, and we are confident that we will win this battle, because our ancestors and our forefathers died in the wars of resistance and wars of dispossession for motherland. And we can't, therefore, 24 years after attainment of democracy, think that we will fail. Not in a country where now there's a freedom of speech, freedom of movement. We believe that we will be victorious in the final analysis. The land will be returned to the people in its entirety. And that's what we want. Watch the space.
Zolani Mkiva, thanks very much for coming through this evening.
The pleasure is mine.
He is, of course, the Secretary General of Contralesa. And that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of As It Happens. My name is Vuyo Mvoko.